Hello, City Schools of Decatur, and welcome to Words with Dr. Whitaker. I am delighted that my guest today is our Vice Chair, Hans Utz. Welcome, Mr. Utz, to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Whitaker. I appreciate it.
And Mr. Utz is now our Vice Chair of the board as of January.
Yes, ma'am. I certainly am.
Oh, well, first question. How long have you been involved with the City Schools of Decatur?
So, define involved. I have kids, I have 4 kids in the school system. So,
okay.
One is now in the 11th grade. So we have been patrons of Glenwood for, what does that come up to? 14 years, 13 years or something like that. Uh-huh. But in terms of leadership roles and actually getting more and more involved, I served on the Senior Homestead Exemption Task Force and was quite a vocal proponent of ensuring that our seniors were taken care of and that the age in place was a value that we reflected as a community. And I became very concerned through that process about the leadership that was at CSD. And I'll just leave the names off the podcast, but it's safe to say that I was underwhelmed by the capabilities that I saw and dug deeper. And it turns out that there were a lot of issues that were pretty evident if you were willing to take a look at the next level of data, both from a fiscal standpoint, from a student performance standpoint, and it just led naturally to a platform. I had been writing about it and I had been talking about it, and it felt 4 years ago that it was time for me to put my money where my mouth was and actually run for the board.
Oh, so putting your money where your mouth was and running for the board. So I would say it's safe to say that's why you ran for the board. What drew you to truly run? Was it that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in order to really make the impact, you have to be at the table, right? And so you can be outside in trying to influence the decision makers, or you can see if the community is willing to elect you as one of the decision makers. And I was.
Oh. Well, that was 4 years ago, and so I will say in your tenure, there have been a lot of changes.
That is safe to say.
That is safe to say. One of the changes is the revealing of the strategic plan. Mm-hmm. So on this podcast, we talk about the strategic plan because it really is the 5-year roadmap. And in March of 2023, the entire school system came together to say, what do we want to have as our 5-year vision? And that 5-year vision was encapsulated into All in Decatur, which has 4 strategic accelerators. Mm-hmm. And so today's podcast, we're going to really talk about all 4 of them. I think as a board member who's been a part of the drafting, the unveiling, and the continuing vision and changing of it, I think it would be great for you to kind of speak to that today.
Sure. Well, I think the impetus for it was, again, not naming names under previous administrations, but there was a point where the entire policy book had been ripped up and thrown out. There wasn't a strategic plan for the direction the system was going in. There were recognizable issues that needed to be addressed, and it did not appear that there was actually any sort of strategic approach to how those were going to be addressed. And so the board, as it's composed now, the four years ago when Dr. Sultan and I came onto the board, I think the desire at that point was to try to put some of the policies and put the strategic plan in place so that we at least had a clear direction that we could communicate to the community. And so that was the start of the process, right? We went through a long period of time working with the community to ensure that we have the plan that we have now. I think it's important when you take a look at a strategic plan that it's easily communicable, that it's not 75 different points with 35 different subroutines. It has to be something that you can say, here are the things that we value, and this is the direction that we're going to go in over the next 5 years. And I do believe that's where we are now.
Yes. And I will say, Mr. Utz, Hans, you were very vocal in placement of this first strategic accelerator from being last to being first, which is student success in all areas. In the first draft of the plan, when it was unveiled, Strategic Accelerator number 4 was student success in all areas. And I remember at one of our board retreats, you said, no, this has to be first.
Yes.
And I said, well, okay. So once again, making sure that this document really does reflect not only what the community desires, not only the direction of the board, but even the way in which I've shaped it over the past year and a half, almost 2 years. So first, we're going to start with number 1, Strategic Accelerator number 1, student success in all areas. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we really say whether or not we're doing what it is we said we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so my first question is, when we think about where we are, we're at the countdown to the end of the school year. So right after we come back from spring break, there we are. We'll be there. Can you tell us about any of the initiatives, programming, accomplishments that you've seen over the year in this area?
Yeah, of course. So first, just I think that if we aren't here for the students, what are we here for, right? Oh. And so these documents are statements of our values, and I did think it was quite important that we start with the students. So we're basically 2 years into the execution of this plan, right? Mm-hmm. And in those 2 years, I'm excited to talk about this because within those 2 years, a lot of very substantive, impactful things that are impactful in the classroom have been accomplished. And as you're very well aware, we're beginning to receive the pushback on some of these changes. We're very intentionally trying to shift the culture of this organization. And so some of the things that we've done that I'm very, very proud of include the implementation of a real science of reading-based pedagogy around literacy, yes. Right? And so ensuring that we have a standard approach that is best in class for how you teach literacy is so critical. I think a lot of people will be surprised to find out we really have a literacy problem. As good as City Schools of Decatur performs on all of the rankings, when you take a look at the least resourced students in our community, we do not teach them how to read. And in my mind, that is a moral problem. Like, we are morally obligated to fix that. And so implementing a literacy program that actually works, I thought was incredibly important. I know there were a lot of parents that were involved in that had advocated for that for years. And so with their help, obviously, we were able to put that in place when you came on board. Putting into place some of the efforts around dyslexia screening so that we're able to catch students that have different learning needs, and that we're doing it in a structured and systematic way. I think that's really important as well. One of the issues that City Schools of Decatur has had historically is that it was the approach that was taken was whatever the person felt in that moment was the best approach to take.
I saw that.
You feel that, right?
I saw that when I walked in. My pre-entry before beginning was a series of canvases. Yes. And walking buildings. I saw there was a difference in that variance in classroom. Really,
and that difference translates to kids being underserved. Full stop. Right. I mean, that's the outcome of it. So the systemization of that, ensuring that it's done the same way consistently, not just classroom to classroom, but school to school, I think is incredibly important. And we're just in the beginning of it, right? I mean, you know how long this takes to try to shift the culture, but like, we're just in the beginning of it, right? Correcting grading, right? So that we're able to have a consistent grading standard, and so that where a child is in their learning journey is able to be understood in the moment. So I had a parent after our last community meeting ask, well, why not just rely on the MAP scores, or why not just rely on these test scores? Doesn't that also tell you where the student is? Sure, twice a year. after the fact. Like, we can't respond to the performance of that child or the needs of that child if we only find out in April that there's an issue, right? And so that consistent grading, so that we can know, yes, this child has mastery, or no, this child doesn't have mastery, and here is specifically where they need some additional support, that is what grading does. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. So I'm very proud of some of those changes.
Well, awesome. So what remains a top priority for you when we think about our students, and we want our students to be prepared to lead a better world?
Yeah.
So what's still top priority?
So we're going to talk about this a lot, right? We are just in the beginning of some of these changes, right? And so we are intentionally changing the culture of the way this was done in Decatur. And I think Decatur has always sort of responded to attempts at making changes like this with a kind of clenching around history and saying, well, we're special, we do it a special way. You know, yes, we agree that there's a problem, and yes, we agree that there are some changes, but please don't change that thing, because I don't want to see that thing changed. And it's just not possible. It is necessary to make these changes. It is necessary to stay the course. This discomfort that teachers are feeling and that parents are feeling was always going to happen if we really meant to fix the underlying issues that we have at Decatur and ensure that all of our students are actually being appropriately educated. So what needs to happen is that we need to be comfortable with discomfort. We need to be comfortable with these changes. We need to hold the line. And we need to get through this part. We are at the point where we've made the change. And the discomfort is at its maximum because people aren't yet used to the change.
Right.
And we haven't yet seen the impact of the change. And so people are at their most vocal right now. Yes. This is the moment where people are at their most vocal. We got to stick it out. We got to stick it out because the benefits are coming.
Yes, yes. One other, I would say, something on the horizon that is getting a lot of talk in our community is the new Early Learning Center. And yes, this lives under the fourth accelerator of effectiveness and excellence in our infrastructure. But tell me, how is this going to make a difference for student success in all areas?
So it's 100% focused on that. I mean, that's why we're doing it. So if you think about when I talked about some of the subgroups that have challenges in our system, the kindergarten teachers can attest to this. You have kids that show up in kindergarten that have multiple stamps in their passport, they speak several languages, and they already read grade levels ahead of kindergarten grade level. They know all of their shapes, all of their colors, all of their letters. They can do basic math. That is one group of kids that show up in kindergarten. And then there is a group of kids that have never been in a classroom before. And trying to bridge that gap at that point, it's almost too late.
Right.
It's almost too late. And access to early childhood education is crucial in order to be able to ensure we start to close some of these gaps. That it's not the fault of the student. It's not the fault of the parent. It is us as a community that have not provided the resources to close this gap. And the Early Childhood Learning Center, in a combination of both the students that we are ensuring are going to have access to it and the location of it, it's laser focused on solving that specific problem.
True. The second accelerator of this strategic plan is about building and sustaining and engaging an inclusive culture. Mm-hmm. Inclusivity takes many, many forms. So talk to me a little bit about where you see us moving and where we have moved and kind of its future.
Yeah. So this is the one that is the uncomfortable one, right? So we are building a culture. We are building a culture that is going to be excellent about educating all children in Decatur. And I think what's important for parents and for staff and for everyone to understand is That is not the culture we had. We had a culture that specifically did not educate our least resourced students. And so when people say, well, Decatur is special, we were special in a terrible way. When people say, we love the culture here, that's because you're resourced and you're not dealing with having your children not be educated, right? So if you take a look at all of the children in Decatur, if we are not educating all of the children in Decatur, in my mind, that is a clarion call to fix it. And so we are fixing that. So when we say inclusive, it means inclusive of all of these students.
All means all.
All means all. What we should probably also put in this particular pillar is the word discomfort, because it's going to be, this building of this culture is going to be uncomfortable. It's expected.
When I think about the month of March, it's about inclusivity of students with disabilities. And this year, for the first time, we had a truly certified programming for Special Olympics for students with disabilities. I know last year you were at the Yes I Can Awards.
Yes I Can Awards, absolutely.
And we had them again this year. So what does it mean for this to be more than just a mantra? When we're talking about all means all, and it's more than just a mantra, what does that look like for our students?
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually flip this back at the prototype of the parent or the teacher that is complaining about the changes that we're wanting to make, right? And lean into that discomfort a little bit. What that means is when we distribute resources, we're going to distribute those resources where it's required. When we talk about the kind of roles that we need teachers to play, it's going to be realigning those roles around where these needs are. When we talk about how we do things from the dyslexia screening all the way through to MTSS, multi-tiered systems and support.
That's right.
We're talking about doing it in a structured way, a systematized way that addresses the needs of all of these students. Any form of disability falls into that particular category. And so what I think the parents that are feeling some of this discomfort, they're used to being able to call the principal and say, don't make that change, or let's stay focused on this, or give us an extra resource for this thing. And what we are saying now is, no, parents. That is what led us to catastrophic literacy rates in this district. That is what led us to massive amounts of inequity. That is what has led us to the situation that we're in right now. So no, you can't do that anymore. We're going to be doing it in a different way that might make you uncomfortable, but it's going to solve these issues.
It's about the student need and the resource, whether it's the book or the person, following the needs of the students.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about the people a little bit. Okay. So this third accelerator is about human capital. And so first, tell our listeners, what is the role of the school board, just in general?
Yeah, well, we really have 3 jobs.
Okay.
Right? And it's going to sound simple on paper. In practice, maybe not so much. So the first one is that we set policy for the district, right? The second one is we approve the budget, right? We're the financial stewards, basically, of the district. And the third one is we manage you. That is the 3 things that we do. Like, you are our only employee.
You're one employee.
We do not manage anyone else anywhere in the administration or staff or in any school. Our job is to manage you, and you take the policies that we set, the budget that we set, and the direction in that strategic plan, and do all the rest of the work. So, that's from a personnel standpoint. From a staffing standpoint, that is the extent of our role.
Yes. And so last year we did some work together around compensation, because this third accelerator, it's about really ensuring that we can recruit, retain high quality professionals. And they need to be compensated.
Absolutely.
And they need to be compensated in a competitive way amongst the metro area. So let's talk about those raises. And I know we're in the midst of budget season right now as well. So let's talk for a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think that compensation, fair compensation, right, is critical to be able to do all of the things that you mentioned in terms of recruitment, retention, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's also an expectation that when we are saying elements of your job are going to change and some of this discomfort is going to happen and we need you to do the job in the way that we're saying do the job, we better pay them for that, right? Like that's an expectation. It's a fair expectation on their behalf that they be fairly compensated for this discomfort. So we did provide last year the largest pay increase for teachers in at least 10 years.
At least
10 years. And we also, I want to be transparently clear with the audience, we also increased salary for a number of other roles, right, that were also substantially below market. So the system doesn't work if teachers aren't fairly paid, but it also doesn't work if administrators aren't fairly paid. It doesn't work if bus drivers aren't fairly paid. Like everyone within the system should be appropriately, fairly paid in this district. And so we felt specifically with teachers, the goal was to get, we said in 5 years, the goal was to get teachers wherever they are in the bands within the number 2 or number 3 position in total compensation in the metro area, right? Well, with the one pay increase, we managed to do that when we talk about total compensation.
That's right.
Now, when we talk about salaries, Decatur is still a little bit below the midpoint, I think. We have much richer benefits than most other districts. But I fully recognize, and I think the rest of the board also recognizes, that, you know, a 24-year-old new teacher coming in to compare and has 2 jobs in front of them, they're not necessarily looking at retirement benefits.
No, they're not.
They're looking at that first number.
The Social Security adjustment versus my TRS and what is that going to me.
They're looking at how much gas can I put in my car this month, right? And so we also recognize that making that adjustment on salary is critical. So I want to say I think we're in 7th or maybe 6th place in the district in terms of just salary, depending on where you are in the bands. And our goal is to continue to move that number up as well, so that we're in the top quartile, the top 25% of pay in the metro area. And that is going to mean that we're going to provide a salary increase this year for teachers as well. I think a 1% COLA and a 3% raise, or maybe I have that backwards, but the other way around. Okay. But nonetheless, a net increase of 4%. And this is in a year where most other districts are pulling back in salary change.
Yes, they are.
I think the largest change that we're seeing in other districts was maybe 2.5%. Most of it is 0.5% or even less. I think we're going to still move forward. We are still moving forward with the more substantive pay increase, even though I know we're going to talk about budget in a second.
Yes, we are.
Even though it is complicating the budget for us. But I think that also speaks to the fact that we view this as a value that is necessary. If we're going to ask the teachers to do the work, we need to pay the teachers to do the work.
I agree wholeheartedly. I know back in our retreat, we did talk about the roles of an adaptive teacher and special education teachers, roles around recruitment and retention, and even for the paraprofessionals that work with students that sometimes can be of a challenge. That is very helpful. So I'm extremely appreciative to the board for saying, yes, please provide the bonus. Please provide the supplements for those individuals, because it makes all the difference in the world.
Well, let me provide a shout out to the community then, right? Because that we're able to do it with a level of comfort because we know the community also shares that value. And I think we heard it pretty clearly in the community meeting that yeah, we talked about what the issues are in the budget, and the community was pretty clear as well, continue to pay the teachers. And so that's a very helpful direction. I'm not surprised. That was what I assumed we'd hear from the community, but I am pleased that they're behind it as well.
Yes, we did have a very well-attended and lively community meeting around specifically the budget. And this was another commitment of the board of saying, let's be, one, transparent, let's be effective, let's be efficient, and let's bring the community in. So having a community meeting in March before the budget is tentatively adopted, and then again after it's tentatively adopted, is why we have a community meeting in March and in April.
Yes.
So let's go ahead. Let's talk about that last accelerator, which is around that fiscal management and the budget. And there would not be a person on staff, nor probably on the board, that would say that you as the vice chair, but also just truly a board member, is very much invested in the fiscal transparency and stewardship in this budget. So talk about FY26, what you're seeing, talk about what, just in general, about this budget development process.
Sure. Well, I mean, so let's start with the fact that I do have, based on prior career and roles that I've done, a level of expertise on municipal budgets specifically that is, it's probably different than most, right? And I also want to acknowledge, and I think the parents got exposure to this, that a $115 million budget is a complicated set of funding stream. The different revenue streams, the different operating costs, the things that are fixed that you can't cut. I think that it's complicated, and so it's not surprising that the community is concerned and wants more transparency. The transparency has to come with a lot of explanation, because it is not something that is easy just to pick up and understand. You have to actually really dig into the details, which we did in that community meeting. I think that was fantastic. We did. But we started this conversation about the senior homestead exemption and the necessity of being able to age in place. It is without question that we are one of the most expensive school systems within Georgia when you take a look at on a per student basis.
Yes.
There are a range of things that drives that, but I think the main thing that drives that is that we have decided as a community that we want to have small, local, walkable schools. Decatur as a district is of a size where we could have one elementary school, one middle school, and one high school. That is roughly what other massive districts do. Because we have instead broken that out into, what is the count in terms of elementary school?
5 K2s
and
we
2, 3,
5s.
Yep. And so
one middle, one high.
And so that is all of the associated fixed costs, all of the associated replicated roles, all of the associated elements that come into maintaining that infrastructure. These are, 100-year-old buildings that require all of the maintenance of a 100-year-old building. We do that 5 times over, 7 times over, frankly, in the elementary schools. And it's not at all like I'm claiming we should change that. Like, it is very clearly a community value that we continue to maintain that. It's expensive. It is expensive.
It is.
And so that's partially what drives some of that cost. It is always in the back of my head, though, that we want people to be able to afford to live in Decatur. We don't want Decatur to become an income-gated community. It frankly is on that path, right, for a range of reasons. The largest cost in terms of tax digest in the city of Decatur is the schools, right? And so ensuring that we aren't just willy-nilly increasing taxes and that we aren't just in an uncontrolled way allowing expenses to grow, I do view that as a part of a role that I play, and ensuring that when I take a look at it, I'm looking at, okay, well, M&O, for example, maintenance and operations, have a high level of understanding of everything that is in that bucket. And so I'm always going to look at that number. It's big. It's the second largest chunk of expense on our expenditure column.
What's the largest?
Well, instruction is the largest,
That's
right? And so as it should be.
As it
right?
should be.
As it absolutely should be. The money we should be spending should be mostly in the classroom. And
That's right.
It is. I just want to be clear to all the parents out there. But so we're going to be looking at those things, though, in very much fine-tooth comb. We can talk, I don't know how much detail you want to get into about things like zero-based budgeting and all of the stuff that we're doing.
Yeah.
But, that actually would be another thing. We talked earlier about things that we're proud of doing. That would be one. We used to just take the last year's budget and add the stuff that we needed for this year's budget. Zero-based budgeting is taking a look at last year's budget, deciding what do we need from last year's budget, and then only then deciding, are there things that we need to add? And so you're constantly resetting justification for what that spend is. And we found things, right? I mean, so when you don't zero base a budget,
yes,
you end up spending money on programs that aren't in effect anymore, that things aren't there anymore. Just nobody's ever gone back and reevaluated that particular category of spend. And so now we're doing that every year to help us be as efficient as possible.
Well, awesome. Revenue. Let's talk about revenue. Revenue streams are very different.
This is all good news until now.
So it was. So not only, of course, there's local revenue, but talk about SPLOST, the other ways in which we do bring in revenue. And even for this upcoming year, what's going to be a new source of potential revenue?
Okay. So we get revenue from multiple sources, right? I think everyone is pretty familiar with when they pay their property taxes, a chunk of that goes to the schools, and that is the largest revenue coming into the schools. We also get a chunk of funding from the state, QBE, Quality Basic Education, I believe is
that
the acronym.
That is correct.
Yep. And so that is the state calculation for how much funding we should get for example, what's the ratio of teachers that we should have. We don't need to get into the weeds of it. It's safe to say it's woefully out of date. I don't think anybody quite, even the people that don't support making a change do pretty much acknowledge that it's about 35 years out of date. And so it is not enough. It is less than half of what we would need to run our current school system. Other buckets of funding, and now this is non-operational, and so just so the public understands, there are dollars that can be spent on salaries, on people, personnel, these sorts of things. And then there are dollars that can only be spent on capital items. Capital items are things like repairing roofs or textbooks actually qualify. But basically, are you spending money on people or are you spending money on a physical thing that's durable? And if the physical thing is durable, that qualifies as capital in general. SPLOST is the 1 penny authorization that we have on sales tax that we can use to offset property tax, and we can spend it on capital items, right? We're restricted to capital items, but we can spend it on any of the capital items in the budget. So, first of all, thanks to the community for authorizing the SPLOST. The benefit of SPLOST, the whole philosophy of SPLOST, is that a lot more than just Decatur residents pay sales tax in Decatur. So it's a way of having other people help put money into our schools and not just our property taxpayers. But we are seeing an unfortunate decline in SPLOST. The sales tax revenues are going down, and it is almost wholly due to the fact that Amazon does not have to pay that local penny, which I think is infuriating. They should, but they don't. And so when you are buying off Amazon, you are actually not contributing into the SPLOST to offset some of those property tax costs. And so we're seeing that as service delivery, as online purchases increase, the SPLOST dollars are decreasing. So the request of the community is please shop local. and for many reasons, not just SPLOST, but also for SPLOST.
Yes, it's anywhere in DeKalb. So
yes,
anywhere in DeKalb, not necessarily simply just Decatur, but anywhere in DeKalb, we do get a portion of that.
Yes.
So last question about what are some of the things that are in our budget for FY26 that you think are enhancing our effectiveness, our excellence in whether it's capital items or not? What are some of the things that you see? Yes, I'm glad we are prioritizing this in FY26.
Well, teacher salary is always a thing that we're happy to prioritize, and ensuring that we're continuing to move the needle on teacher pay is I think really critical. And that honestly is the largest increase between last year's budget and this year's budget, right? Full stop. We are, this year's budget is paying for the design work associated with the Early Childhood Learning Center. And so continuing that work and ensuring that we're moving the needle on that. I recognize that ultimately building that is going to be a capital item. That's going to be a capital discussion. Potentially even a bond discussion, right? But the work to design it at this point is still coming out of the budget. And so all of that, including ultimately hiring the people that we need, the principal for that school, and ensuring that we're beginning to put the staff in place so they're ready to go as soon as the building is done. That's all kind of envisioned in this budget. And then frankly, I think continuing to hold the line on the changes that we have put in place that we all know will improve those student outcomes, but that are currently in their most uncomfortable phase.
Yes.
I think that's critical to continue on that path. I also know, we've spent a bunch of money on safety and security. That's been a big buzzwords, I guess, with the governor this year, basically across the country.
Yes.
And so bringing on a new safety and security executive director, I believe now, ensuring that we have the right protocols in place to keep the students safe. I did. I had the opportunity to be interviewed by one of our students seeking Eagle Scout recently. And the main thrust of questioning was around the standard response protocol and some of the things we're doing around safety. And one of his final questions to me is there anything that you would like the students to know about what you're doing with this? And I do want to point this out, that when it comes to safety and security, a lot of times ignorance is bliss, right? Not knowing about it means you don't have to worry about it. And as we, over the next year and couple of years, talk a lot more about safety and security and begin implementing a lot of these programs that we have in place for safety and security, it is expected that there's going to be some concerns in the school. Like students will be more aware of safety as an issue than they may have otherwise been. Bear with us. Bear with the process. It's not that you're less safe now than you ever have been before. That is not the case. And the things that people are worried about are extraordinarily rare events. We just need to make sure that we have the stuff in place to be as effective as possible on any scenario. It's not just, some of the terrible things you can envision. If somebody breaks an arm or if somebody gets hurt and you need to have an ambulance come there, it helps us with any number of things that can happen in a school and helps us be more effective across the board.
Yes. Effectiveness and excellence is that last strategic accelerator. And safety, no, it wasn't one of the 16 objectives under the strategic plan. However, safety and security is the bottom line of what we must do in order to have student success and an engaging culture and staff that want to hire to retire.
Yeah.
It's It's the foundation.
It's honestly the only thing that's actually more important than the instruction in the classroom
is right.
The safety of the children that are under our care, without question. I mean, it goes without saying, but it can't go without paying attention to and investing.
Yes, it comes with funding.
Yes.
We must have it, and it must come with funding. So, Vice Chair Utz, is there anything else you would love to share today?
Well, so I think I said it at the beginning. I'm going to hammer it again, right? We are at the point of peak discomfort in making some of these very necessary and required changes. And it is not the fault of teachers or parents that were in the situation that we're in, but it is, however, all of our responsibility to ensure that all of our children are being educated as absolutely as well as possible. What we are doing is ensuring that the systems are in place so that the teachers can deliver against that promise. And so bear with us, stick with us. We're going to get there. This is the hard part. In 2 years, we're going to be talking about the differences in the numbers, and we're all going to be thrilled and patting ourselves on the back. But work with us to get there. We really appreciate what you do.
And I appreciate what you do. So thank you,
Dr. Whitaker.
Thank you so much for your leadership on the school board. Thank you for being all in for all staff and for the City Schools of Decatur. And finally, thank you for being a guest on Words with Dr. Whitaker. City Schools of Decatur, have a great and wonderful spring break.